It's a great pleasure to be here. It's a real privilege to be part of Fellows Fund, one of the most exciting venture capital firms in the Valley. And this is a great event that we have for the 2 days. And we're starting on a high note, so it's going to be my great pleasure to interview Scott White. Scott is the head of product for Claude at Anthropic. Of course, Claude, one of the absolute frontier models that many of us use every day and are impressed by every day. So it's a great privilege to invite Scott to come up onto the stage now. We're going to have about 30 minutes of conversation. Well, Scott, thank you for being here. And I have a few questions prepared, so I'll be looking down at my phone just so that I remember the questions. Let's dive right into it. Many people say that Claude is best in class at coding. Can you tell us how it became that way? Was it a conscious strategic decision to prioritize coding, or was it a side effect of other decisions?
Yeah, for sure. So at a high level, we definitely are very intentional about horizontal capabilities that we want the Claude models to be market leading at. Things like tool use, computer use, reasoning capabilities. Coding is one of those. We also try to create as many opportunities for ourselves to be surprised by what we would call emergent capabilities. And so coding is really one of those where, we do place a lot of bets. We build, we're training these very large models. And so we're trying to make them good at a very, very wide variety of tasks, which allows us to have an opportunity to get surprised by when we see things be particularly good that we weren't necessarily expecting. A year ago, that might have been something like computer use. And so we launched a very primitive API based on computer use because we saw that the model was surprisingly good at it. And then we wanted to get more feedback from the market. Coding is one of those things where we saw with the Claude 3 family of models that, the model ended up being really good. And we heard both from our customers who were using the model for agentic coding that it was really strong. And then we also started building our own product features like artifacts, which is the ability for Claude to spin up a sort of custom UI in front of you. And we were surprised by that. So we wanted to lean into where we saw the surprise and build product experiences that leveraged that emergent capability. And that's also where Claude Code came from. Claude Code came from the fact that we had trained this model, and then we were just mostly experimenting with it internally as a prototype to understand, where were the gaps on agentic coding. And then, Boris, who was one of our engineers, built something that caught fire internally. Everybody started to love and use. So we saw this sort of emergent capability that then helped us build a product experience around it that got product market fit internally at our company. All of our researchers started to use it. Then we started understanding the gaps in what made it even more valuable. And once you understand those gaps in what's making it more valuable, then you can be more intentional about training the model to be better where you have actual perceived and learned gaps. So I think it's this combination of being intentional while also being experimental on a wide variety of horizontal capabilities, finding the emergent capabilities that are surprising, testing the boundary of those emergent capabilities, understanding whether it's like truly ready for production or not. And then once you're excited about it and you think you have something there, then it is building the flywheel of insights, both with ecosystem customers and through the products that we build to improve where we see there is, a limitation.
Scott, I love that answer because I think you've just provided a roadmap for a lot of people in the audience who are founders and thinking about being founders, looking for opportunities. And, I think most of us in the world have been impressed by the emergent capabilities of AI models, amazed at what they can do. And it's interesting to hear that those of you on the inside, also in the research and in the development, also being surprised by what you're building yourselves. That's great. And so maybe to follow up on that, so how do you actually decide which applications to build and launch in-house as Anthropic products versus which application areas to leave to founders, entrepreneurs, customers of Anthropic?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's maybe at the nexus of commercial demand, our ability to solve pragmatic problems that we're hearing from our customers, often whom are adopting both the model in things that they're building, both for their external products, maybe internal processes, but also our first-party products like Claude.ai and Claude Code. So addressing what we believe is customer demand. And then third, the ability for us to learn about the limitations of the model to improve the model. And it's really valuable to have ecosystem partnerships that allow us to partner with so many great companies to get feedback on how we can improve the model when we're not building the end user experience. But also us building our own end user experience in first party products allows us to both simultaneously solve customer problems that we're hearing about from the market, grow our commercial business, which no one will complain about, but also, most importantly, perhaps learn about the limitations of the model so that we can continue to make the model better, whether it's for our own first-party product or whether it's for the ecosystem or both. Like, in traditional product development, you have this sort of relationship with your customer. You have a very clear problem that you're trying to solve, and then you try to deploy resources to solve that problem and go through iteration loops with your customer. The model is this new sort of mercurial thing that exists where it's more important than ever to maximize the impact area of feedback and the surface area for collecting that feedback. So it makes sense for us to have amazing ecosystem partnerships that get us that feedback. It also makes sense for us to build our own products that allow us to get more feedback to improve the model. And I think when we decide that it's something that we're super excited about is when we believe there's a big commercial opportunity, our customers are asking for it, and we believe that there's a gap and a unique ability for us to execute on it. And then most importantly, when we believe us doing it will provide us an opportunity to learn how to make the model even better for everybody.
Yeah, that makes sense, thank you. But you ended by talking about opportunities to make the model better. And although we're all impressed by the capability of frontier models, many people say that the latest generations of frontier models are disappointingly small improvements over the previous generations. So what would be your perspective on that?
Yeah, I don't necessarily agree with the premise, actually. I think that maybe when a lot of people are perceiving limitations of a particular model, they're thinking about it within a particular context. The reality is that these models are used for such a wide variety of use cases and implemented in such a wide variety of ways and at various degrees of sophistication. And if you think about something like a very simple chat experience where you're asking about recent updates in the news, or you're asking, to synthesize a very, small set of, documents or summarization or something like that, I think you are right. I think that the models have been pretty good for the last year at doing very simple use cases. And so an additional release of, a new model, you will not perceive or feel such a significant difference, but that's actually mostly because the task doesn't require a high degree of model intelligence or a very sophisticated harness. If you think about something like Claude Code, I absolutely think that every incremental generation of the model has had incredibly meaningful impact on the ability to solve the problem that it's purporting to or promising to solve. And I think when we launched, Claude 4 and Claude 4 Opus, like what we saw a dramatic inflection in the ability for it to solve more, complex problems. And we saw, the commercial byproduct of that as well. And so I think, in many ways, we're still seeing the task time completion, like the complexity of what a model is capable of doing and how long the tasks that it would accomplish a human to take. We're still seeing the double time of that stay the same at around 6 months or so. So I think like the thing that has changed is the diversity of use cases. And the more sophisticated use cases, the more agentic things in nature often, we are absolutely still seeing acceleration driven by model intelligence. It's just that many people are measuring simple use cases, and that's where their intuition is, and that's just not where the frontier is.
I think that's good to hear, and I think that actually also provides insight and possibly even an outline of a roadmap for entrepreneurs who might be in the audience to look for these new use cases that really require the greatly improved intelligence. And when we think about small degrees of improvement, maybe we're looking at problems that essentially have been solved already. And in particular, if we're just asking questions to a chatbot, you were telling me offline when we were talking earlier, just that's a relatively simple application of intelligence.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. I mean, I think we often talk about two things. One is something that's called the model overhang, like the capability overhang, which is today, if you just stopped the progression of model intelligence and model training, there's probably a lot that you could do to leverage the intelligence of the models that exist right now. There's a tremendous amount of economic impact and value that you could all build. But I actually believe that, a more interesting opportunity is where we're still blocked on model intelligence and building for future model intelligence. So instead of building for today, instead of building for the model overhang or the capability overhang, build for where you're seeing the model not work today. Like push against the boundaries of what the model is capable of, because if you assume this exponential is going to continue, and I do believe it will, like you will start to see the value at the next generation of the model. And so I always think about building now 6 months ahead, a year ahead of where we think the model intelligence is, because that will catch up, and then you'll, benefit from the opportunity of being there when the model intelligence reaches that frontier.
Great. I think my next question actually can be viewed as a follow-up. I'm a professor at the University of California in San Diego, not full-time currently, but I used to be full-time. And what I can see, and my colleagues see, AI models can answer almost any exam question in almost any subject better than even top students. But companies are still hiring students and still getting value from the humans. So what is the difference between the skills that are needed by a student and the skills that are needed by an employee? And how is Anthropic thinking about building AI that goes beyond intellectual skills to have the additional skills that humans have?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think, I at Anthropic am building a lot of products for pragmatic use cases, often professional in nature, where people are taking these models and implementing them in something that they're doing in a work context. Claude Code is an example of one of these. It's often used by professional developers. But I think the byproduct of that is I sort of have seen three shapes of how jobs and kind of people are changing in their interaction with models. I think the first is what I would call sort of automation of toil. I think there's an opportunity for things that were not professionally expansive or really things that you would want to do. Updating your CRM, like Salesforce, after any sales call that you have or something like that. That's not something that was necessarily like fulfilling or really positive use of time. It wasn't helping you like close deals as a salesperson. It's just administrative maintenance of a system. That's the kind of thing that a model can now just take off your plate, right? The second thing is what I would call kind of like giving you professional superpowers. If I'm a product person, I can now actually have Claude look at all of the transcripts from all of our sales conversations and get high quality feedback on what our customers are asking for, what the gaps are, in a way that a year ago, 2 years ago, I just wasn't able to do that as a product person. And the third, and what I think is the most interesting, maybe related to your question, is as the subject matter expertise of these models becomes wider, and as the product surfaces that leverage that model intelligence become easier and easier for more people to use, the skills that are now available to people are different than they were before. So I am a product person. I've done a lot of coding in the past, but never been a professional software engineer. But now when I think about trying to convince the engineers at Anthropic to do something, I will build a prototype of it and I'll show it to them using Claude Code. It's probably not ready for production. There would be a lot of comments on my pull request, but it's enough to get them to understand what my perspective is and then get them excited to continue to finish the swing on that thing. So I find myself writing product specs to give to Claude Code, not to give to an engineer to build something. And so I think the thing that is going to be interesting for the future is as people, and I call this professional expansion, people's like role purview is widening as more skills are available. And so for students and for people in the workforce, I think it's understanding opportunities to professionally expand and like how you can leverage your unique skill set with a wider variety of tools. And then for the models, I think it's like the availability and access to tools. A year ago, there were very simple tools that the model would have access to. It could use one or two tools. You could do a web search. Now it can access many, many tools, and things like the Model Context Protocol exist, which give access to many, many tools. And so it's this combination of the model now has many, many different tools which provide access to specific skills. Then the human has many more skills under their sort of purview that are more accessible now. But at the same time, humans are very much still needed in the loop to provide their like guidance, and autonomous agents are not sort of here yet. And even if they are here, there's still a tremendous amount of human involvement that you need to in terms of steering and in terms of guidance and safeguards. So I think it's just the deployment of those skills is changing.
If you were to summarize some advice to students in just a few sentences, what would you say to students who are graduating now, the skills that they should develop so that they will have the most satisfying and productive careers?
Yeah, I think play with these tools, like understand and try to build things, because even if you're not going to be an entrepreneur, even if you're not going to be a professional engineer, like understanding how to go about trying to work with these models to build things, understanding the mechanics of prompting, understanding tools, and gaining an intuition for where this is going. I'm actually quite impressed by a lot of the youngest people I work with are the most maybe AGI pilled. Like they sort of understand these tools really effectively. They can think about where things are going to look, what things are going to look like in 6 months, and they're not as sort of steadfast in the way that they have been working in the past, and they're very, very readily able to adopt new modalities of working. So a lot of the younger people who are not like engineers, professional engineers, but who have joined Anthropic are all coding for like 50% of their job or more. Especially like the designers are basically front-end engineers now. So it's like this sort of like understanding what new skills you have available to you and gaining an intuition for those. I think it's a lot of like prototyping and playing and understanding is what I would encourage them to do.
That's great. That's good to hear. So let's go back to talking about, in your role as the head of product for Claude at Anthropic, you've said that experimental evaluations are the new product requirement documents. Can you share a concrete example where an evaluation suite replaced or reshaped a traditional product roadmap?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there are many, the model is the product, I think, first and foremost. And if you think about something as simple as maybe like web search, which is a product that we launched very early this year, the product spec might be incredibly simple. It might be like, I want to ask Claude a question that when it seems like it needs recent information beyond the cutoff window from pre-training, like use the internet to get a result. That's kind of the product spec in a traditional product spec side. But what really matters is the quality of the experience and whether you are actually getting to the answer that you want to. And there's a lot that ends up going under the hood in terms of the model quality and the quality of the result that ends up having to be expressed in evals as opposed to as just a traditional user story. For instance, how do you measure whether a web search should have been triggered or whether it shouldn't have been triggered? You have to come up with a set of evals and deploy your taste where that boundary is, because it's not always going to be extremely deterministic, like when something should be a web search and when it shouldn't. So you have to come up with a representative set of evals that express your taste, express your intuition and your opinion about how this product should work. When should it search really, really hard versus when should it search really, really, not many times to give you a quick answer versus a really in-depth answer? How important is source quality, and how should you think about choosing the sources that you're going to look for to get the results? All of these things need to be expressed as a set of evals, so that as models change, as the other tools that we introduce change, you're able to measure regressions in the experience on these dimensions. But it's also, more importantly, your way of expressing your opinion or your taste. So something that would have been very simple from a user problem statement actually becomes quite sophisticated when you think about measuring it quantitatively and understanding the interaction of the model with that tool in that context and the user. And that's where evals become important in defining that taste, but then also making sure that you have regression, tests effectively. We've had this for code and software development. It's continuous integration, continuous deployment, like CI/CD. We evals are that for models. A model is part of the flow of the experience. It's called prompt engineering because it is engineering. And it defines and represents what quality means. That doesn't mean it's everything though. Evals are like, I think of them largely as a way of codifying your taste and your opinion and regressions, but there's a tremendous amount of intuition, prototyping, playing with the experience and the felt experience of whether something is working or not. And evals are never going to be like the entire thing. It's going to be a key component.
Great. So evals are the core of how you think about designing and building a specific product. But in the roadmap for Claude products overall, how do you prioritize between immediate ease of use, which is really attractive to users, whether they're consumers or whether they're employees in organizations on the one hand, and then on the other hand, there are enterprise needs. There's governance, there's integrations, there's security, there's certifications, and how do you prioritize between ease of use and then enterprise needs?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. There are areas where they're divergent, but I think you'd be surprised at how convergent they often are. If you talk about ease of use, in an interesting way, consumers or prosumers, people who are power users, like a lot of our users are power users who are using Claude for pragmatic and sort of builder-oriented use cases. Those people might often be more sophisticated than people who are adopting it in a business context where it was maybe a line of business that wants to deploy it to the company and they might not be familiar at all with Claude. And in that way, it's actually more important in the business context that you make it extremely approachable, extremely easy to use. You can, your end user might have never heard about you before. Whereas in the prosumer individual user context, they might have sought you out. They discovered you, they onboarded themselves, they might actually be more sophisticated. So in many ways, they are very harmonious, I would say. We build a lot of primitives that want to solve problems for people professionally. First and foremost, we care about professional use cases for Claude and really pragmatic sort of builder-oriented use cases. And so things like professional development, things like financial analysis, like these are things that are valuable in a professional context. But it's extremely, those primitives that we build in pursuit of those, the ability to create files, the ability to code up bespoke UIs, those are often also helpful for individuals who are trying to solve those similar problems. So a lot of those core primitives that we build are extensible and useful to both businesses that are adopting our solutions and individual users who are trying to solve similar problems. And so it's harmonious there. In terms of a delightful end user experience, it's harmonious. To actually win in the enterprise segment, though, there's a tremendous amount that we need to build to that is, unique and bespoke to that environment. Security, compliance, deployment, administration, MCP deployment and governance within your organization. These are all things that are extremely important to us that, we have entire teams dedicated for because we want to, win and progress in that segment. And so while most of it is harmonious, a lot of it is harmonious, we're extremely intentional also about making sure that we parallel path our prioritization and sort of investments on the business side.
So talking about obstacles to deployment, and in your answers to previous questions, you've talked a lot about how the models are becoming able to use more and more tools, and when you add intelligence on top of the tools, then you're moving from assistants to co-pilots and moving from co-pilots to pilots, and which people sometimes call autonomous AI agents. So what is the biggest obstacle to greater trust in autonomous AI agents? Is it hallucinations? And do you see hallucinations in particular as an obstacle that is enduring or an obstacle that is being overcome?
Yeah, great question. I think, if you think about hallucinations, it's a combination of the model and what exists in its corpus, the tools that it has access to be able to verify a claim or a task that you're trying to accomplish with it. Like if you give it a tool that has access to your customer transcripts, like your sales meetings, and you ask it about a particular sales meeting where it might have hallucinated without a tool, it's now going to use that tool, find the real information, and then not hallucinate anymore. And then there's just like fundamentally the model and its sort of reasoning capabilities in addition to how we scaffold it and prompt it to provide an answer or not. And there's this interesting trade-off that exists between refusing an answer and or being creative to try to get you an answer. And you could say like eliminate hallucinations, but then it'll just refuse a lot of your answers and there will be a lot of false positives, versus allow it to be more creative in its thinking and then it might give you more hallucinations. That's also why we invest a ton in things like mechanistic interpretability. These models are largely black boxes and exactly why it's giving you the answer. So mechanistic interpretability is our research effort to understand which neurons are firing and why, so that we can actually seek to understand what's driving this hallucination and can we categorically stamp it out so that you eliminate it. That's highly sophisticated research, and it's we launched something just as a fun experiment about a year ago called Golden Gate Claude, which is we found a way to dial up. We found a neuron within Claude, or a feature we call it, that was like really obsessed with the Golden Gate Bridge, and we just dialed it up. And then every answer Claude gave you was like building some analogy to the Golden Gate Bridge. And it actually, like, it's a fun experiment, but it's actually science that helps us understand, like, why is it doing that? So I think there's a lot at the model layer, but then, beyond hallucinations, you talk about trust for autonomous agents. There's also much more beyond just that. There is, what access does it have to what tools? How do you give it secure access to those tools? Should this thing be representative of a person in your organization acting on behalf of a person, or should it be an agent that's more expansive across the different shapes of people in your organization? That actually becomes a lot more difficult, because in the former, I'm Scott, I already have a set of tools at the organization. I have licenses to all these SaaS tools. I have permissions that exist within those SaaS tools. If an agent is acting on behalf of me, you can just map that agent's permissions to all of the permissions that already exist. I can authenticate into it, and then it's just acting on behalf of me. So that is a way that we've seen a lot of organizations deploy those agents, is on behalf of, so that you can tie that context very specifically. But then there are other things. There are things like prompt injection. And the ability for a model to almost get like social engineered into doing something that it shouldn't do because you're injecting some context into it. And that's another category of research that we're exploring. And we recently launched a very limited early alpha of a Claude browser use extension that allows Claude to use your browser. And the reason we only launched it to a small number of people, with a lot of caveats and a lot of warnings, is that there are still risks for things like prompt injection. And we want to understand those risks by partnering with the community and doing a lot of our own science around it so that we can eliminate. And that's where I'm actually very excited about how much Anthropic cares about safety, is, both creating a race to the top dynamic to encourage the market to care about safety, but it also has all these very pragmatic implications on building things that users and businesses can genuinely trust and feel comfortable deploying. And that's where I think there's like a harmonious sort of balance between our commercial aspirations and our scientific and our value-based aspirations.
The emphasis on safety at Anthropic from the beginning has been very impressive and very welcome. And so has the really impressive basic research that has been coming out of Anthropic. I remember, for example, the papers on models being sycophantic and what to do about that. And a couple of years ago, Anthropic was really emphasizing the constitutional approach. Is that an important emphasis currently? And what have been the lessons learned about that approach?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think guiding Claude to be helpful and not harmful, and having it have a set of values instead of a list of do this, don't do this, is incredibly important to guiding it towards good outcomes, positive outcomes, beneficial outcomes for the world. But it is also something that is important for us to understand: how can we guide Claude towards exhibiting specific behaviors that also, outside of just simply the constitution of constitutional AI, allows us to steer Claude towards more positive outcomes regardless of what we're trying to get it to do, whether they're pragmatic use cases or whether it's more about the fundamental behavior and personality of Claude, for instance. So that is still extremely important to us. It's still something that we always implement into any model that we're training. And it is also an important foundation that we can learn how to guide Claude towards values that are less again, deterministic and more based on what we think the characteristics that we want Claude to be as a model, as a virtual collaborator, as something that's helping you solve really pragmatic problems.
Mm-hmm. Well, talking about pragmatic use cases and talking about virtual collaborators, what are some of the most impressive or most valuable AI agent applications that you are seeing in production now? A lot of startups are building toolkits for agents, a lot of excitement around agents in the future, but what about agents right now?
Yeah, I spend most of my time thinking about things in the professional sphere and the professional ecosystem, and so I see things like Replit is a great example that's making development and agentic coding available to a lot of people, just like Claude Code does, and that's another awesome company that's helping a whole new generation of developers learn how to code, and sort of Lovable is another great example of that. I'm also have seen just incredibly impressive implementations of agentic systems at companies like Manus, which is like a really, really sophisticated agent that's capable of using many, many tools and doing a lot of general purpose sort of task completion. But then I also see companies that are building agentic systems that are really transforming the way that they think about business process, and there are companies like Novo Nordisk that are doing amazing things as it relates to regulation and sort of all of the extremely advanced science that they do. And so it's fun to see things that span from like pragmatic use cases that help people professionally expand or learn new things, all the way up to what like a global pharma company does to build medicine for beneficial global outcomes. And it's fun to see the spectrum of that because we both build our own products and we work with a large ecosystem who's building their own product too.
That's great. And at Fellows Fund, we're pleased that we are investors in Replit and many other great companies also. So one topic that we haven't mentioned yet is reasoning. And at the level of the models themselves, perhaps the biggest innovation in the last 12 months has been the emergence of reasoning models. What is the relationship between what you might call the pure reasoning, which can win gold medals in mathematics, Olympiads, and greater success for agents? So how does reasoning make agents better for business or consumer applications?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think reasoning is basically the ability for a model to think really, really hard about a problem and approach it from multiple directions. And actually, when you cross-reference reasoning with the ability for a Claude, Claude or any agent to access tools, that's actually where you see like compounding benefits. If I want to think about asking Claude, I've used maybe this example many times, so I'll stick to it, like extracting feedback from a particular set of customers, and I say, hey, I want to get our enterprise customer feedback versus maybe the SMB feedback. Pre-reasoning, Claude might just like go, say, okay, this is what I'm going to go and try to do. I'm going to go and make like one big set of tool calls to, Gong or whatever the tool that we might have that's pulling in all of our transcripts, and then it'll pull all of that information in and then try to answer it. Now, if I give Claude the ability to do reasoning and have it access tools, then it can say, okay, the thing that I think I'm going to do is I'm going to first like understand what enterprise means at Anthropic versus SMB. Then I'm going to go and look for the feedback. Then I'm going to go and synthesize all this information. It having that extra layer in that first step, it might go and look at our internal documentation and say, oh, this is their canonical definition of SMB versus enterprise. Now that I have that, I'm going to move on to the next step, and I'm going to use my canonical understanding that's more sophisticated now to go and figure out how to pull only those customers to then get all of that information. So it's the ability for it to click one level deeper and then use those tools that then gets it to a much, much higher quality answer in the end. So it's a really essential sort of processing step for it to ultimately understand and get to the best outcome.
Well, Scott, thank you. This has been really insightful, and I wish that we could continue, but unfortunately we're out of time. And we have more exciting sessions that we need to leave the stage and leave room for them. But thank you, Scott.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.